Buenos dias, New Zion. It's so good to be with you this morning. I hope you had a restful week. Today, we are going to continue on our lesson in codependency and how to break the chains of codependency. This is the second part of our lesson. So for those of you who were not able to watch or were not present in the live last Sunday, I'm going to recap a little bit what we've been talking about, what we've been working on. So we talked about codependency being a pattern of imbalanced relationships in which one person acts acts in a way that is based on what somebody else does. So we forego our identity and we forego our desires, our thoughts, and our feelings so that another person can be appeased, so that another person can be happy. So codependency is basically the complete annulment of ourselves so that another person can do X, Y, or C. So we see usually this pattern or this dynamic in families in which there has been a pattern of addiction. There's an alcoholic or there's a person that is addicted to something, and how the entire family dynamic revolves around just not making this person angry, trying to ignore what the addiction is doing to the family. So imagine that there's somebody in the house with an addiction to cocaine or alcoholism, and that the entire family has to revolve around the spells of alcoholism, or how drunk this person is, or how they act the next day, how the family has to repress their feelings, because if they come forth and tell the person how they ruined the party or how they were misbehaving while they were drinking or they were using, they get aggravated, they get angry. So what is learned in families with these dynamics is to repress feelings, to repress the truth in order for this person to not be bothered, in order for this person to not be angry, which unconsciously serves as a way of protecting us from that anger, because we don't know how to deal with that anger, or we don't know how to deal with that pain. But we know, as we've been talking about, that codependency does not apply only to families or relationships in which there's an addiction. That we know in psychology now that codependency applies to any type of relationship where there's an imbalance of power, an imbalance of will, an imbalance of participation, and in which one person has dysfunctional behaviors that significantly affect the quality of the life of the other person or the circle, whether it be the family circle, the organizational circle, a circle of friends. And then based on this person's dysfunction, other people start acting to calm the dysfunction, to try to cover for the dysfunction by annulling their desires, their thoughts, their feelings, and their expressions. So we talked a little bit about what codependency is not, and I want to touch on this briefly because sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, and this is incorrect. So we need to understand what codependency is not so that we have a better understanding of what is and how we can process it, how we can manage it. And today we're going to get into how to work to get out of codependent relationships and how to work on ourselves so that we can reclaim our identity, our desires, our feelings, and our thoughts, and ultimately our lives. So codependency is not the same as dependency. While in codependent relationships, there's an excessive dependency on somebody's feelings and actions and thoughts, sometimes people depend on us that are not codependent. I'll give you an example. If you care for an elderly parent, this parent is dependent on your care, but that does not mean that you're in a codependent relationship with your parent. Or in romantic relationships, the very existence of the romantic relationship, whether it be marriage or if you're dating, depends on the love, trust, respect, and support that you give each other. The relationship depends on that. That does not make it a codependent relationship. What is also not something that could be deemed codependency. Codependency is not the same as empathy. While empaths have the ability, and I would even go as far as saying that is a gift, to feel other people's emotions with more clarity or be more sensitive to other people's emotions, it does not mean that they are codependent if they can detach and they can let the responsibility of others be the responsibility of others and then assume the responsibility for themselves. And lastly, codependency is not the same as making a sacrifice. Sacrifices are made, as we discussed last time, and on a temporary basis, and it is a choice. And this is the key word. With codependency, there is no choice, because in annulling your identity and your drive, your motivation, you are not choosing anymore. A sacrifice is something that you choose to do for a greater good, whether for yourself or for others. And it's the awkwardness of a sacrifice that may bring, or the uncomfortableness of a sacrifice may be temporary, but it's not a constant suffering. Codependency has a more chronic suffering type of characteristic. When we are constantly depending on somebody else to give us value and to remind us or assert us in our feelings and our desires, then we do not have any stability, and that is conducive to long-lasting suffering. And long-lasting suffering, emotional suffering specifically, leads to or could lead to several disorders. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth as we go through. So now that we recapped a bit of what codependency is not, let me remind you of the few scriptures that we were revising for this topic of codependency. We'll start with Galatians 1:10. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. We can certainly say that certain patterns of codependency reflect or are similar to patterns of idolatry, because in this scenario we are making another person the source for our validation, the source for our well-being, when in reality we are responsible for our well-being. And then I'll remind you also of another scripture that we revised, specifically talking about this one, which is also in the book of Galatians. It is Galatians 6:5. For each will have to bear his own load. God's clear command to have no other gods besides him includes not making other people our gods. So that being said, let's review the characteristics of codependency. What are the main traits, if you will, of codependency or codependent relationships? Well, first, as I've been saying, the suppression of one's emotions to overly care for something or for someone in an attempt to control or fix what they do or what the situation does to us. We have to understand primarily that codependency is about us. Even though we acted out on other people, the gist of it is that we don't want to feel bad. We don't want to feel rejected. We don't want to feel pain. And because somebody else's actions may be causing us pain, or make us feel rejected, or make us feel that we're not enough, then we embark in this behavioral program in which we attempt to control what other people do so that it doesn't hurt me. ultimately, codependency is about my inability to cope with feelings of pain, of rejection, or abandonment. What we have to understand, and what we know in psychology, is that every unhealthy behavior and every unhealthy pattern has come up at some point in our lives as a way to protect us from pain. Now, this is very interesting because you would think that unhealthy behaviors are just undesirable. They are undesirable, but they're just undesirable things that we need to get rid of. But the reality of unhealthy behaviors is that they exist to teach us a lesson and to show us. Unhealthy behaviors shine a light into our deepest sorrows, the things that we haven't been able to resolve within ourselves or in our family circles or with the people that we love the most. And they're like pockets where trauma got trapped, and then a behavior was born out of the effort to not feel the pain or to surpass it or survive it. So therefore, if we start seeing our unhealthy behaviors as information, we would have a much better chance not only to see them for what they are, but to see them with no shame and with the eagerness to understand why is it that we behave a certain way and how we can heal so that we can do it better and our relationships can be better. So when someone's behavior has affected you and you have become obsessed with controlling it, you have fallen into a codependent pattern. Remember, we cannot, as much as we would like to and as much as we would want to try, control other people's behaviors. We cannot control what they think. We cannot control how they will react. We cannot control what they're going to do. We can only control what we do in light of a specific situation or in light of a specific relationship dynamic with that person. Another characteristic of codependency is irrational fear of abandonment or being unloved. When I started saying that really codependency is about us and our inability to deal with feelings of pain, we find the fear of abandonment at the core of every codependent relationship. Think about this for a second. If you are in a codependent relationship, or somebody that you know is in a codependent relationship, the things that you do to appease the person that you're with have the purpose of that person not abandoning you. If you weren't terrified by the possibility of that person not loving you, not being with you, you wouldn't have to put up with this behavioral program that you're putting up with or that you are building in your relationship if you didn't fear that abandonment. So where does this fall spiritually? When we make another person our source for our stability and for our well-being and to affirm us, then we have made another person our God. And since we know that God is the only source and the only stable, unconditional source of love and acceptance, then we cannot make other people who change over time, whose feelings may fluctuate, whose behaviors fluctuate as well, because ours do too. We cannot make another person our source. Number 3, an attitude of control over an outcome to prevent pain, rejection, or upsetting someone else. This goes hand in hand with number 1. And then number 4, extreme preoccupation, emotional, social, financial, or sometimes physical over another person. Take, for instance, let's go back to the scenario of having a person that has an addiction in the family. If you are in a relationship with a person that is using or let me say it a better way, abusing substances of any kind, then you know very well what it is to have broken promises, being waiting for them late at night, hearing them say that the situation is going to change and then it doesn't change, and this constant chain events of disappointments and deceiving start to create in us an extreme preoccupation that almost becomes an obsession. Because we don't know what's going to happen, there's constant uncertainty. And even though life is in itself uncertain, as humans, to properly function psychologically and emotionally, we need to have a certain degree of stability and a certain degree of certainty that would allow us to feel that we can relax and that we can derive safety from the people or the spaces that we are interacting in. In codependent relationship, that aspect of safety has gone. And it has gone because it's been diluted by the lying, by the broken promises, by the constant power struggle of trying to control somebody's behavior and somebody just being uncontrollable and not wanting to be controlled. So extreme preoccupation is usually the first sign that you are in a codependent relationship. Now, does that mean that in relationships we shouldn't worry? No, there's a degree of worrying that is accepted, that is normal, that is expected. Although I don't like to use the word normal a lot, but we say it's expected. However, when that level of worry surpasses your ability to stay focused on your daily task, your abilities to function properly or regularly during the day, and it's interfering with your pleasure, it is interfering with your rest, it is interfering not only with your sleep in terms of rest, but with your mind rest. If you cannot be able to disconnect mentally from constantly worrying about this person, constantly thinking what they're going to say, what they're going to do, constantly rehearsing what you are having to tell them in the next conversation that you have. And when life has become a constant and sustained pattern of excessive worry, then we know there's a significant disturbance in your life that requires attention. And this is usually what happens with codependent relationships. It is not unusual for people in codependent relationships to develop depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and even other more complex disorders, because the constant exposure to this stress, the constant exposure to the pressure sustained in time creates within ourselves a sense of danger, a sense of constant awareness that is extremely draining, not only for our minds and for our spirits, but also for our bodies. Other characteristics of codependency are people-pleasing, caretaking, poor self-esteem, reactivity, and lack of assertive communication. Reactivity is an interesting one because when you have been for so long, so to speak, walking on eggshells to not bother, to not, make another person angry, to not offend them, to not have them feel like you are accusing them, etc., it's almost as if you are drinking water but there's not a way out. And you become almost choked by the water that you're drinking. And at some point, that water is going to have to come out. It is the same with feelings. Feelings are energy. And so when you are constantly, so to speak, swallowing your feelings to not anger somebody else, swallowing your truth, the things that you need to say, the things that are warranted to be said, then what happens is that one day, over seemingly nothing, you are going to explode, and you are going to let all those feelings out, and not in the best of ways. That's why reactivity is another really common characteristic of codependent relationships. Our relationship that is healthy is a relationship in which you can freely speak about what's bothering you, obviously from love and from a standpoint of love and respect, but you can be who you are, say what you're feeling, and ask for what you need without the fear of being rejected, without the fear of being stonewalled, without the fear that you are going to be ridiculed or that you're going to be dismissed. And if you are in a relationship in which this is what happens every time you express yourself, and this is what happens when you're trying to bring up something, I'm not going to say negative, but I'm going to say something that is maybe not so pleasant, but it is absolutely necessary to talk about, then I would argue that you need to revise whether you're in a codependent relationship, because chances are that you are, and that needs to change. Now, is being a codependent in a codependent relationship a relationship that is doomed? Not necessarily. If we take the necessary steps to become aware of our actions first, because remember, codependency is about us and we cannot control other people's behaviors. So the first thing we need to assess is, what am I doing? How am I participating in this pattern of codependency? And I'll get to that in a second, so that you can assess yourself, process your emotions, and then if the other person is also willing to learn how to communicate better and how they participate in this pattern of codependency, then the relationship has a very good chance of being something fantastic after healing. So this isn't a death sentence unless there is an unwilling party, and in that case you would still have to work on yourself, because remember, you can only control what you do, what you think, how you feel, but you cannot control other people. And then this other person would have to decide for themselves what they want to do. What we know is true is that specifically in codependent relationships where there's an addiction or where there's profound and deep dysfunction, you cannot continue to enable the pattern of dysfunction, because then you will also destroy yourself. And there was a quote by Melody Beattie, the book that I recommended last time, that I thought that was really striking. And she said, "We frequently react to people who are destroying themselves by learning to destroy ourselves." And this is the true danger of codependency, when we have over-identified with somebody in a way that if they are destroying themselves indeed, that we participate in destroying ourselves with them. And this is the real importance of being aware of which codependent behaviors, because we all have tendencies to codependency, because we live in a world in which it is important for us to feel loved and accepted, and rejection and hurts and abuse hurts, and when somebody doesn't listen to us and doesn't value us enough, that hurts. And so in that hurt, if we don't know how to manage it, then we can certainly are at risk of falling in codependent tendencies and behaviors and patterns. So what is the true remedy for codependency? The true remedy for codependency is detachment. Now, what do we understand as detachment is something that needs to be clarified, because typically detachment has a negative connotation, but in psychology, detachment is actually healing. It has a very positive connotation. Detachment is not neglect. This is the first thing that I want to clarify, but detachment is the setting of boundaries. It refers to giving the person the responsibility that is theirs and keeping the responsibility that is yours. It's knowing where my responsibility ends and knowing what the responsibility of others begin. And in that knowing and that awareness, to cultivate and to practice the ability to detach from chaos that is not my chaos. In codependency, if I could illustrate it in a way, it's almost like stepping into somebody else's chaos and participating in it, as opposed to accompanying somebody in their chaos to show them a way if they choose to take it, and then step back in your reality. Codependency is also not seeing reality as it is, but as we want it to be. So we can be in a relationship in which we wish to have, let's say, a father-daughter relationship in which the father has been absent, and the daughter really wants to have a relationship with her father. That's a healthy desire. But in that desire, if the other part does not respond appropriately or functionally, this daughter cannot step into the chaos of rejection, cannot step into the chaos of abandonment in order to be seen. And this is the true matter of healing in codependency, is to learn how to see us as opposed to expecting somebody else to see us. When we strive mentally, emotionally, and physically for detachment, that is, knowing that this is your problem and not mine, in which I can pray for you, I can accompany you, but I don't have to suffer it, we are achieving indeed healing. Detachment is also believing that there's a natural order and that there is a God and that we are not that God. How is that possible? Well, we are not Him, and it will require that we have faith in the ability of people to discover their own journey to healing. When we engage in codependency, we also enable other people to continue in their dysfunctional behavior. Every time I see my son, who I know is using cocaine, and I see him walk into the room and I keep quiet, and I keep feeding him, and I keep folding his clothes and taking up his responsibilities, I am indeed enabling the behavior that I want to see eradicated. So when we enable people, we also become their God, because we are becoming the source for them to continue to function in the way that they have been functioning, where we are inside of ourselves waiting for that to disappear. So how does that make sense? Codependency is a form of insanity where we are hoping that our behavior changes, but by all that we are doing is reinforcing that same behavior that we want to see eradicated. So we trust that God knows, has ordained, and cares about what is happening. We understand that God can resolve all things, so guess what? We stay out of His way and we let Him work, because He can work everything together for our good. Our inability to trust is also a key factor in codependency, and specifically our inability to trust God. That God can take care of this situation, but that God can also take care of me first and foremost. When we make other people our gods, then we're leaving God out of the equation. And we are stepping into or meddling into what He wants or plans to do with us and with that other person and with the situation. And I understand this is easily said than done, but is nonetheless a vital practice, and it should be a daily practice. Sometimes what happens in codependency is that enabling has been going on for so long. We have become so accustomed to cover for other people, to have them say jump and you say immediately how high, that in not caring for ourselves, we stop listening to ourselves. We are so obsessed with listening and attuning to these people's feelings that we have completely neglected our own. And typically when you see in codependent relationships is the codependent person feels terrible, but that does not even know why or exactly how to describe it, because we have gone so long without listening to ourselves that we have lost the ability to do it. We don't know how to do it anymore. So what is the key to detachment? So detachment is the solution, but how do we get to detachment? So I'll repeat something I already said a couple of times. Learning the art of acceptance. And just like detachment is not neglect, right? I can step out of somebody else's chaos, but I acknowledge the pain that the person feels. I can accompany the person in that pain. I can offer my support as long as it doesn't hurt me, right? It doesn't interfere with my emotional, physical, spiritual integrity. Acceptance is not the excusing of abuse or dysfunctional behaviors. So because we don't know in codependent relationships what to expect, we tend to accept that this person is just the way it is and I just have to sit and suffer through it. Acceptance is not excusing of behavior. While trauma can explain to us why behavior is a certain way, trauma still does not excuse behavior. There are two different things, and this is important to understand. Accepting reality for what it is and not for what we want it to be is the first step. And that does not mean that we have to adapt to the abusive behavior, but acceptance is just really looking at the situation from a lens of clarity, from a lens of this is exactly what is happening, so I know that the abuse is probably not going to stop. I don't deny it, I don't cover it, I don't have to make excuses for it, it just is. And when you allow yourself to see the situation for what it truly is, you also allow yourself to respond responsibly to your environment, right? This liberates us from the pressure of making things something they are not. Because in making reality what we want it to be, we deplete ourselves emotionally, intellectually, and even physically. It is very draining. Image management, as we have discussed before when we talk about unhealthy family patterns, is at the core also of codependency, because I have to manage a certain reality, especially to the outside, to the people outside of my circle, and it takes so much effort, so much mental energy, and so much time that we become depleted in the process. And the danger of this is that our faith can also be affected. Why? Because probably most of the people that are in codependent relationships have been praying about this relationship to change, have been praying about this person to suddenly have an insight and work on themselves, and have prayed not to, have their family suffering. But have you ever thought that maybe the answer to that prayer is in the responsibility that you have toward yourself to make yourself better and healthy, and maybe, just maybe, see the situation for what it is, and allowing yourself for that clarity in which God can and will take control, but you need to see yourself first. Sometimes we pray for other people, and this is great. This is encouraged. We should always pray for other people, and especially the people that we love. But sometimes in codependent relationships, the erosion of faith comes from not getting seemingly from God what we're asking that He do to other people, or with other people, or in other people's lives, without knowing that we have to first and foremost take responsibility for ourselves and the part that we are playing in this situation. So accepting means that we stop pretending. We stop pretending that the abuse doesn't exist, or that it will magically end, or that the person that has a drinking problem, or that has a gambling problem, that the problem is just going to magically disappear. We stop pretending. We stop excusing the dysfunction, and we start saying, this is wrong, this is unhealthy, this makes me suffer, this makes our family suffer. In a state of acceptance, we respond in healthy and assertive ways. Now, does responding in healthy and assertive ways guarantee that the problem is going to be resolved? Does it guarantee that the relationship would be better? Unfortunately, not. Because again, we can only act from our field of responsibility. But in acting from our field of responsibility, we would have a much better chance of having that relationship heal. But even in the event that it doesn't heal, because it also depends on another person, you would have saved yourself and you would have healed yourself. And in healing yourself, you would have much more clarity and a much better understanding of what you deserve, and that unconditional acceptance and love that God has given us has nothing to do with the acceptance that other people or the love that other people can give us. Feelings are energy, like I said before. And so in codependent relationships, this energy is usually stored. It is, swept under the rug. It is like, filling this bottle of water till it can hold water anymore. And when we repress our energy, when we repress our feelings, we are repressed in every other area of our lives. And when we are repressed, we don't function at our best, right? Feelings do not go away until we acknowledge their existence. Feelings do not go away until we know that they are there. So if you are feeling uncomfortable in a relationship, constantly pressured, if you are feeling that you cannot be your full self, that you cannot talk about your truth in liberty, and it cannot, and that when it happens, there is not an atmosphere of respect, of other people being receptive, at least to what you have to say, then I would say there's work to be done. I had a few questions for you last week. If you remember, let me just look them up here real quick, because I have the answer for those today. And if I'm not mistaken, let's see if I have them here. Well, the question is if there was somebody or a situation in your life that was taking most of your mental space, that you were excessively worried, and you were constantly concerned of what would happen if you were able to detach from that situation or that person. What was the fear in that? And I asked you kindly if you could write about it. So based on what you wrote and based on what you thought about that question, I have 2 more steps to follow to close this class on codependency. So based on that you wrote, and based on that situation or that person that you thought about, from which detachment sound liberating and almost as a restful vacation, I want you to find somebody who is safe, with whom you can share what you wrote about. One important aspect of codependency is that it gets us very isolated. Because in this image management and in this pretending that our reality is something that it is not, that we have to keep up a certain image of our families, of our marriages, even of ourselves in front of other people, we have isolated ourselves from the community that we need during these moments in order to heal. So I want you to find somebody who is safe, somebody that is a good listener, that is accepting and non-rescuing. This is important. In this spirit of sharing what hurts us in this situation, or what is worrying us about this person or the relationship that we're in, we have to find somebody that would listen and empower us to seek our solutions, that would give us a guide. If we are looking for a person to rescue us from that situation, then we are perpetrating the codependent pattern. And in that perpetration of the codependent pattern, we are creating more chaos, and then we are consciously inviting other people into our chaos. So if we run into somebody that gives us back lovingly our responsibility, we may tend to see that as rejection. And it's not rejection. We have been so accustomed to have our value be placed in us by other people that we may see the loving gift of responsibility and empowering as rejection. So we need to be very careful in finding a person that is non-rescuing. Now, I understand that not everybody, unfortunately, has a person that they can feel is safe to share these thoughts or these feelings or these worries with. So in that case, I would advise you to find a support group. There are fantastic support groups in our city, and I would recommend that you do a search for codependency support groups, which typically are wonderful contexts in which you are not going to be judged, and you are also going to be in the presence of other people that are having the same struggles. In that isolation that I was talking about, we can feel sometimes that this is only happening to ourselves, which in turn creates more isolation, more feelings of depression, more feelings of anxiety. Therefore, when you go to a support group and you see that other people are dealing with the same circumstances or similar circumstances, you can find that you can identify with them and you can share your experiences. And typically, these groups are built around a structure that is non-rescuing, that is very respectful of people's wills and emotion, and it will allow you to express yourself freely. Because in codependent relationships, we typically lose the ability to express ourselves freely. So we become like the bottle of water that is overflowing, and we don't have anywhere to overflow, right? We don't have anybody to catch that water that is overflowing. So these groups can be a great opportunity. And if you find somebody who is safe, if you have somebody in your life who is safe, a safe person, what determines what a safe person is? It is a person with whom you can share your feelings in absolute freedom, without the fear of being judged, without the fear of being rejected, and without the fear of being hurt. If you have this safe person, it could be a family member, it could be a pastor, your pastor, our pastor, it could be a professional, it could be a friend, then I would highly encourage you to find the spaces to be in relationship with these people. The more we are in relationship with people that are safe to us, the better chances that we have of escaping codependent behavioral patterns. Note, I'm not saying escaping the relationship, I'm saying escaping the pattern and healing ourselves. The more we are in contact with the people that are safe to us, that see us for who we are, that allow for us to make mistakes, that allow a space for us to be human, the better chances that we would have at healing. Isolation brings disruption. Isolation brings disorder. So we need to get ourselves back in order by relating to the people that are healthy for us. And if that can be also coming to church, your church family, That's part of your safe space. Finding the spaces where you are happy, where you can laugh, where you can let go of life's worries. All of these ingredients make up for healing. Healing is not just one thing that you do. It may be one pivotal thing that you do, but it is also comprised of little things that you do on the daily that support the motion of healing. So healing is also an energy, as it is dysfunction. So you want the energy of healing to be propelled by the activities and by the little behavioral changes that you do on the daily. So I'll give you an example. In codependent relationships, it is very typical, or is very common, for the person who feel very tired. So typically, how does this look in therapeutic context, or in context where people are sharing their experience? They'll come and they'll tell you, I am so exhausted and I don't know what it is. I've been sleeping well. I've been, doing all these things. I'm just so tired. There is a fundamental loss of pleasure in life and on daily life specifically. So bringing back some of that pleasure into our lives, which, by the way, we talked about this last time with Pastor Copeland. God has given us life to live it to the fullest. And He has given us music and dance and laughter and friends and the arts and all these things that are those small but big behavioral changes that propel the energy of healing. So reading the Word, being with your church family where you feel accepted, worshiping is an act of acceptance too, and of gratefulness. All these things propel the energy of healing. And then after you find that safe person, your safe spaces, with people that are non-rescuing and with whom you can be honest, you can start treating your mind to some peace. How does that sound? Just treat your mind to some peace. Just like we treat ourselves to some ice cream every now and then, and just like we treat ourselves to a new pair of shoes or, something that we like, let's normalize treating our minds to some peace. Worry and obsession are abusive to our minds. Worry and obsession, extreme worry that is the way in which we abuse ourselves. There are ways in which, and we like to talk about self-care, but in order to fully understand self-care, we have to understand the opposite. And those are the ways in which we are hurting ourselves, which is truly abusing ourselves. Worry and obsession, extreme worry and obsession, is a way of abusing ourselves. Not taking care of our sleep patterns. For instance, not sleeping enough or sleeping too much. Other ways in which we abuse ourselves is the way that we eat, right? If we eat in a way that doesn't help our bodies be healthy, then we cannot expect our mind to be healthy, because we are not disconnected from our bodies. We are spirit, body, and mind, right? And the three are connected. And so when one is suffering, the other two suffer. We have to make sure that we are caring for ourselves spiritually, emotionally, and also physically. So treat your mind to some peace. Learn something new. How you can treat your mind to some peace? I often say that in psychology we make sometimes a big mistake, and that is saying things like, stay positive. But how do you stay positive? We fail to tell people how to do it exactly. So while we cannot always be positive, okay, because I wanna take that myth away of also toxic positivity. No, we cannot always be positive, but we can always have hope, and that is different. Hope is permanent. It doesn't fluctuate on feelings. Positivity may fluctuate on feelings. I bet that maybe if you had a terrible day at work, you don't feel that very positive that day, but you can still hope that tomorrow will be different, and you can still hope that things will change. And so how do we foster and also propel the energy of hope? What propels the energy of healing? Learn something new. Take a class of something that you have been interested in doing and have not. Discover what makes you feel happy and peaceful. And this is different for every person. This is another thing that is important to highlight about self-care. Self-care is unique. It is unique to us, to our personality traits, to our likes and dislikes and characteristics. In the process of healing from codependency, that has to be a process of self-discovery. We have to rediscover ourselves because we have forgotten in codependency how we feel, how to listen to what we want, and we have to rediscover that. And that process can be very fun. It can be very liberating and healing. So try to ask yourself every day, what do I want? Uncensored, right? Only for you. Ask your inner child what you want. I suggest, and I think I suggested this when we had Sunday school with Dr. Thomas and Pastor Copeland. I suggested find a picture of you when you were little, but not just any picture. Try to find a picture of you that represents who you are. You know what I'm talking about? When you can look at a picture of somebody, in this case you, and you say, that's right, here I am, there I am. You can see it in your eyes, you can see it in your smile. Try to find a picture of you when you were little that represents you. And every morning and every night, look at that picture. Do it for a week, and then we'll connect back and see how that went. Do it for a week and ask the child in that picture, what do I want? What do I enjoy? What makes me feel happy? What makes me feel safe? Chances are that you are going to discover a whole lot and more than you were expecting. Mostly in a positive way, reconnecting with that playful part of yours, with that part of yours that just wanted to live with no complication. But also, you may find that there are things in your childhood that are still there that you need to heal. And it is all good. All this information is good and useful, and it's blessed, because if you can be in awareness of what you need, then you have started the path of healing, and then you will have the ability to walk out of codependent patterns. You may discover that sometime during your childhood, in order to be heard and in order to be seen and feel seen, you had to comply or mimic other people's emotions. And then you would understand where that codependency tendency came from. And then you can talk about it with a safe person that is non-rescuing, and you can heal it. You may discover that when you were a child, there were things that hurt you profoundly and that made you come into a shell, kind of like in a cocoon, negating your emotions because it was painful to admit them. But now that you're an adult, the good news is that you have the resources, is that you have the strength to heal it. And then unconsciously, as you connect with your inner child and as you ask your inner child for information about you, the inner child holds the DNA of our hearts and our souls. So if you dare to go in this journey and ask your child, your inner child, about those things, you will discover a treasure. And in that treasure, you will be propelling the energy of healing. And pray in the process. Pray that in the process of rediscovering yourself and rediscovering your inner child, that God will accompany you, that He will show you and highlight the areas in which you need to work a little bit more. Pray that He will bring the resources, the people, the opportunities for you to heal your inner child, and for you to heal from these patterns that we've been talking about. And lastly, I want to encourage you, once that you have talked to somebody who is safe and found your safe spaces and the spaces that make you happy, and after you have treated your mind to some peace, just like we treat ourselves to some ice cream, I would encourage you to practice surrendering the work that you do at the end of each day to our Creator, and trusting that He can take care of it all, and that you don't have to take care of it on your own. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. If you have any questions, you can certainly write them to us, and we'll get back to you. I wish you the best of luck with this endeavor, and remember that the best endeavor that you can embark on is the one of healing yourself. Have a great day.